one thing I want you guys to pay attention to is a statistic that I have heard bantered around by casters a lot over the last few months, and certainly last year with TSM. And that is the concept of average game time, or like ending up with a clean win. So in a clean snowball, in my opinion, this is a very misleading statistic to talk about, and a very misleading way of kind of like looking at fundamental game strategy. So I'll give you a quick example. Let's say TSM last year, one of the fastest average game times in the entire world across any region. And this was because it was specifically trained, like proactive. So one training mechanism that I implemented was essentially like, if we're not in a play at any point in the game, we're doing it wrong. We're not doing something right. So we essentially broke down the game from play to play to play to play, from like setup, execution, and then the advantage phase, and looked at gaps between the end of the advantage phase and the beginning of the next setup, and tried to eliminate those gaps and criticize them heavily after the game in order to make sure that we set up for plays immediately on reset or taking of advantage after the previous play, so that there was always essentially a further play going on, right? And what that results in is a really proactive and overpowering 0 to 20 minutes against teams that cannot play defense. And even against teams that can play defense, it's a lot of pressure. And especially learning in that offensive way to like push and pull so that you know when a play is not working. But the fact that you're pushing on bot tower, and then you decide, okay, this play is not gonna go well, then you can back off and take free things like dragon or blue buff, like as a repercussion of your pressure in the play. So this is a very, very sound way to play the game, and it's a necessary way to train the game. But if you train it first and you train that, you're not then training other things, right? So remember, this is a zero-sum game in the elite level of esport. It's like, if you're training one thing, you are not training another thing. And at the amateur level, you can always increase your training and your volume and your intensity. But at the pro level, like, we're already maximized, right? So literally, you choose your fate. It's kind of a pick-your-own-adventure book when you're training. And if you pick the right stuff, you end up a world champion. If you pick the wrong stuff, you don't. So if you look at high-level Korean teams, what you'll notice is that they are very consistent in making correct decisions around key ways that you win the game. So the game is very complex at the start, and it simplifies greatly as it wears on. The number of things that are important drop down a lot. And at some point in the games, there are literally like 2 or 3 decisions are the only decisions you can make strategically. And then of course the execution around those decisions. So if you look at really consistent Korean teams, what you will see is that their instincts and habits around the most important decisions in the game have very few flaws. And that is because that is where they originate and start their training. And their average game time is not something that they care about as a statistic, because a more important statistic is, like, can you not lose the game? Can you get into any game, basically, and then at 20 minutes, at 25 minutes, at 30 minutes, can you choose the correct decision for your comp? And can you win the team fight? These are the 2 most important kind of factors to a game. Snowballing a game is a very risky proposition when your opponents can play defense really well and they can just survive until they actually win the game off of a single play, such as executing pressure in order to get vision, sitting on vision, getting a pick, and then taking Baron and ending the game that way. So I think that early in the season, and especially like in the first split of the year, the focus by casters on clean games on average game time is a little bit misplaced and misunderstood, because essentially what happens is a misunderstanding that like teams that are good and that know how League of Legends are played are focusing on completely different things. They aren't focusing on cleanliness or on snowballing. They're focusing on fundamentals of late game compositional play. And once those habits are so ingrained that you literally cannot lose games anymore, because if you get the game in a certain state, with a 2 to 4K deficit or greater at a certain phase of the game with like compositions that you understand how they interact, you are habitually just not making wrong decisions, then you can work backward through the game and focus on other things. But remember, we as pros just have this 20-minute review period, like between a scrim and then our VOD review, and that is all the time that we have, that in the actual scrim environment. So focusing a lot on early game proactive design means that you forfeit quality in terms of late game instinct. So what I would like to see essentially is casters and analysts kind of like working with the audience and kind of showing them when these kind of fundamentals of the game are very strong in terms of late game decision making, and when teams choose to we are choosing when teams choose to not snowball a game. So for example, they get a lead and then they don't do anything with their lead for like 20 minutes and they wait till 24 minutes or 25 minutes when Baron is easier to tank, and they set up the vision around the play and they execute then. Like, this isn't actually a flaw in how the game should be played, and it's not a sign that a team doesn't know how to snowball. What it is a team A taking the lowest risk, highest reward play, which means that, like, okay, we're with our key composition and we have an advantage. Therefore, the highest probability to win the game is to essentially like trade farm equally and maintain our advantage until X time, when we can use our lane pressure that we know that we now have to secure vision around our objective and then get played into and secure the objective in a very safe way to victory, which, you know, can happen at 30 minutes. And the game was never really in jeopardy just because it didn't necessarily get snowballed like earlier than that. It's also a choice that it's not happening because that isn't the thing that we're training, because the ability to do that does not guarantee victory as much as the ability to not make mistakes mid and late game. So I predict that you will see that G2 is going to have a much longer average game time compared to Team Solo Mid of 2016, because one of the things that was really hammered in by like our experience at Worlds was that if you spend half the split training proactivity 0 to 20, and then you spend the second half of the split training instinctive late game decision making, you're going to lose to teams that train the entire year on only late game decision making and rely on learning how to play proactive and turtle style offense and defense like in the early game, and rely more on solo queue and just like playmaking and correction on those periods of the game. So that means that like a team like G2, if we want to do well internationally, should focus on the most important facets of the game almost exclusively. I'll use a simple example of Michael Phelps. Like, he went into the pool and every single day he did the most basic swimming drill that is possible. When I was training 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds to prep them for competitive swimming training programs when they turned like 6 and 7, the very first drill that we learned is the same one that Michael Phelps does when he jumps in the pool, because the fundamentals of swimming are always dropping away. Like, the way that the brain learns habits is like you get something embedded and then you immediately get lazy at it. And so these kinds of fundamentals need to be constantly trained, especially in a game like League of Legends where the compositions and the meta are always evolving, and the way that you do those fundamentals is always changing. So I think that like once you have the capability of playing a seesaw kind of proactive early game that leads to defense, and once you have a comeback playbook that allows you to hold off like snowball style play, then spending a ton of time on your like really smooth 0 to 20 in terms of like oppressive, really fast game time destruction of the opponent is actually not preparing for Worlds, not preparing for what you're going to face against teams that can play defense and can read the map and can set up proper vision in order to back off of objectives, can play to the correct point and in the timeline of the game where a decision and a well-executed engage in team fight will actually win the game. And for that, I think you can draw parallels back to our very first game against Mata, where we had a lead the entire game, but they executed well on their initiation 3 times and won the game off of 3 team fights after losing everything through our very well trained and oiled proactive playmaking machine. So this is very simple. That like there are lower risk, higher probability ways of winning League of Legends, and that those are the things that teams should be training. And in a system where you can only train one thing at the behest of something else, that is what the best teams in the world should be focusing on nowadays. What are your thoughts? I'd like to make this a conversation, so please reply in the comments down below. And I'll see you guys on the IM stage.